Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Leadership Lecture Series. Our speaker for today is Dr. Umesh Achia. So, Dr. Umesh Achia retired in 2014 from ExxonMobil following a distinguished 39-year career as an inventor, innovator, technology leader, and product line executive. He is currently involved in technology consulting as President of ACHIA LLC. He is an alumnus of Lawrence School, Lovedale, and he graduated from IIT Madras with a B.Tech degree in chemical engineering and from the University of British Columbia in Canada with a Ph.D. He is recognized on Esso's patent honor roll for significant intellectual property contributions to ExxonMobil's downstream business. The topic of his talk today is going to be reflections on a career after IITM. I now invite Dr. Achia for the talk.
I'm so glad to be here. In fact, I'm so honored, privileged, even humbled to be here. Coming back to the campus after 50 years, I think, 48 years or so. So it's a long time. I don't look that old, but really it's been that long since I left campus. Professor Murali Krishnan is not here yet, but Professor Nagarajan, thank you for this invitation. It's a real privilege again. And I know that Dr. Krishnan said that I may have some words of wisdom to share with this group. So that's one of the reasons I'm here. So he's talked me in. And what I want to do is share with you my experiences. But before I go there, there are a couple of people in the room I want to acknowledge. Firstly, my wife of 43 years is here with me. Her name is Daisy. So I've had an even longer career with my wife than with ExxonMobil. So, and I have a very dear friend here. His name is Pati. We went to school here together for the 5 years, and we were friends right from the start. 50 years, Pati, since we joined in 1963. We wrote the entrance exam. So very long friendships. So it certainly is wonderful. Okay, I started with the title. Professor Krishnan said, why don't you reflect on your experiences in the industry and share it with us? So I said, okay, maybe life after IIT Madras. But after I put that title down, I started to really reflect because I didn't think I had much to say. I said, okay, all these years have gone by. I've had a lot of fun. Time to move on, do something else. But on reflection, actually it may read reflections on a career since birth, because I think many of us, most of us, get influenced even before we come to the IIT to do something in engineering and go on to do other things. So the content of my presentation, I'm going to keep it pretty generic because I know people are from many different fields here. I was going to ask for a show of hands, but I won't do that. I'm assuming that people are from different fields, so there's no point. I'm a chemical engineer by training, and over the course of my career, I've done a whole bunch of other things. So chemical engineering is kind of the mainstay. It's always been with me, but I've done other stuff too. So I won't ask for a show of hands, but I'll keep my comments as generic as I can. And I work for ExxonMobil. Many of you may have heard of ExxonMobil. Since I'm retired, I'm not going to make a pitch for this company, nor am I going to badmouth them. So I'll just share my experiences and what they have given me in terms of life experiences. Okay? And as far as you all are concerned, I mean, IIT is a brand name. When Pati and I left IIT and we went abroad almost immediately, really very few people knew about the IIT. In fact, when Indians landed in the USA, we were kind of an endangered species. They used kid gloves on us. They thought we were quite a curiosity back in 1968. So it's been a long time, and that I guess the brand name has been built around IIT. So as far as you folks are concerned, you already have a head start in this game. So that is wonderful, and congratulations. You all probably have seen that 60 minutes clip on the IITs, and if you haven't seen it, just go on YouTube and take a look at that. It's well, it's humbling in a way, but just take a look at that. Also, the U.S. Congress has passed a resolution. You may not be aware, but the U.S. Congress, this is the only set of institutes, the IITs, have been recognized by the U.S. Congress as having made tremendous contributions to American business and American entrepreneurship. And they have not recognized any of their own universities like MIT, Princeton, you name it. So that's a very big recognition for IIT. So you all are off to a head start. So best of luck. Okay, I'm going to start moving on, and let's try this technology here. All right. Okay, summary very quickly. I've been in the corporate world all my life, actually, after my Ph.D. So normally in the corporate world, they give you 5 minutes, 1 view graph, and 5 lines to tell your story. So you start with a story, and by the time you get to the bottom line, you got to close and say, that's my story. I've been fortunate enough, I've been given, I think, about 45 minutes with questions. So I'll keep it as short as possible. I'll keep my remarks as generic as possible. So I'll cover, where did it all begin, talk about some forks in the road as you get to making a career choice, my IIT experiences, and also I went to grad school in Canada at the University of British Columbia. Very quickly, we'll cover that. Most of the presentation is around career stages and really stories. What did Professor Anand tell us today? He said, tell some stories as long as the truth doesn't get in the way, or some such thing, okay? So I'll keep it as honest as possible. Yeah, they're all true stories, my stories, so hopefully it'll tie in with the presentation. And then the career building blocks. I like to spend a few seconds, if not a few minutes, on giving back. What giving back really means is, those of us who've had this long experience, have such a great education, now think about what shall we give back, because we've been so fortunate. And one thing I want to urge, and I'll say it right up front and I'll say it later on, is at your age, you should start thinking about giving back right now, because that's how you build your thought process to say, what can I give back that I've taken from my education and from my professors and everyone else and my family and so forth. And finally, we'll close, okay? So that's a long-winded start, but let me get going. Let's see, a better point there, I think. Okay, oops. Anybody tell me who this gentleman is? It's not me, definitely not me. Any guesses? Any guesses from the audience? Edison, Thomas Alva Edison, okay. He was also known as the Wizard of Menlo Park. As a child, actually, he was kind of my wizard. Let me just change. I'm not really savvy with this here. Okay. And here's a little thing from Wikipedia, but I just wanted to copy it verbatim because it talks about Edison. He was an American inventor, but you see that they've also connected the word businessman to inventor. So invention on its own is a great thing, but it doesn't serve the purpose. He was a businessman who took that forward, made it useful for humanity. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that Edison invented. I mean, he gave us light. He gave us an incandescent bulb. And from there, he had over 1,000 patents on various things. And he's credited with having created the first industrial laboratory. So he was kind of my champion, if you want to call it, guru. And as a child, my father used to read a book to me. It was a very brief book. It had 8 pages, and it was called 8 Great Americans. He was a big fan of American industry and American entrepreneurship, and especially American independence and all those kinds of things. But he was an administrator, so what he was interested in was there were 8 Americans: Washington, Jefferson, Whitman, Lincoln, Carver, Carnegie, Adams, and Edison. He wanted me to get interested in the guys up front, like Washington, Jefferson, and his hero was Lincoln. And I liked the guy at the very end of the book, which was Edison. So he wasn't much of into engineering and science and that kind of thing. So he was trying to influence me to go towards the art But he understood. He understood that my desire was to do something in this area. So he was a great mentor. He introduced me to this stuff, but he didn't force me to do stuff. He said, he said, great, if you want to do something like that, fine. And I used to complain to my dad, this guy Edison, he's invented everything. He's just invented everything. There's nothing left to invent in this world. It's pretty boring to go out into the world and find nothing to do. I found out that's not the case, and you all will find out that's not the case because there's just an infinite number of new things to do in this world. And then, as I was going through school, I started getting interested in chemistry, and I used to bring all kinds of chemicals home. And I had another mentor, which was my mom. She had a pretty modest place in her kitchen, so I commandeered a shelf from her, and I put all these chemicals in there. Of course, at that time, I didn't realize some of these chemicals could be dangerous, and if you mix them, you could get even more dangerous products. But so be it. She was a mentor, and she believed that I wouldn't get myself into trouble. So I had two great mentors. And you might ask the question, why are you talking about mentors right now? Because one of the things you'll find about a career, whether you stayed with one company for all these years like me, or you change and do many different things across your career, always find yourself some good mentors. Golden rule for a career, find good mentors. Okay, a little long-winded, but let's move on. Okay, so you'll see some yellow banners across the bottom of the slides, which is really a summary of what I've said. Discover your wizard, whoever that may be, and unleash your passion. So for me, the passion was, fiddling with gadgets, trying to do some new things, and that kind of stuff. So here was my wizard. He was a wizard of Menlo Park, and I found my passion. And, oops. Okay. And use your mentors to help you reach your goal. If you can just remember those two things, I think you'll have a grand career. I've had a lot of fun. Okay, that's kind of a start for your career. Dad and mom can be very good mentors, but you'll find a lot of other people along the way who can be very good mentors. Okay? Okay. Okay, I'll get through this slide quickly. I guess we all come across what we call forks in the road, making choices. And all of you in the room have made your first choice, I think, which is after high school, you've picked engineering or sciences, you've come here, so you've already crossed that bridge. I think technology needs a little coaxing. And then, of course, the IIT entrance, we've all struggled through that one. I'm told it's a lot tougher now than it used to be when we were doing the IIT entrance, but IIT entrance was always tough for all of us. Okay? I was interested in chemical engineering mainly because I told you I liked chemistry. I was fooling around with chemicals in my mom's kitchen, and I also liked aeronautical engineering, but I was prepared to do anything, mechanical engineering, etc. Okay. I think I'm pressing the wrong button now. Okay. Okay, great. Anyway, we'll leave it there. And of course, at the end of IIT is really the fork in the road for most of you now. I mean, we've all gone by this. And at the time we were coming out of the IIT, as far as I remember, there were very few jobs around. And a lot of us were thinking about management, which is very popular today, but at that time it wasn't. And at that time, there was a company called DCM. I think they still exist, maybe Delhi Cloth Mills or something they were called. And they would call IIT graduates to come for an interview in Delhi. Now, many of us living in the South were really not interested in going all the way to Delhi, but you had a free train ride, and you could go and have an interview. So that was one option. Industry was another option. I kind of fluked getting a position with Carborundum Universal. I think they used to make abrasive wheels at that time. And then the choice of post-graduation, whether we do it in India or abroad. And I guess at that time, IIT was not big into postgraduate work per se. So going abroad was a kind of an obvious choice. And many of our classmates, we used to all apply to a whole slate of universities in the US, and all the applications would come in, and we would sort and sift through it, and stuff that guys who didn't want them, pick them up and select a bunch of universities and apply. So going abroad was the thing, and then of course the question was, I went on, I did a master's, then I did a doctorate, and that was at the University of British Columbia, and that's what UBC stands for. And at the conclusion of that was a choice. Do I want to teach and do research? Yeah, I was kind of interested in that. Was interested in basic industrial research. My thesis topic was kind of weird. It was, in fact, only my eldest sister remembers the title. It was something to do with the visualization of fluid flow of drag-reducing fluids using laser holographic interferometry. So it's a whole mouthful of words. It had some quantum fluid mechanics thrown in there, etc. And I quite enjoyed it when it happened. So NASA was very interested. They said, but the space shuttle program hadn't started yet. They were interested in propulsion systems. So it looked interesting. The US Air Force was working on high energy density batteries. And we thought, what are these guys, crazy or what? Why do you need high energy density batteries? This was back in 1972. So it looked very interesting. And then there was this opportunity to do industry applied research. And that came along about the same time. And having done chemical engineering, I said, why don't I just go back to what I possibly am good at, and let me try industrial research. So that's how I ended up with Esso in Canada. UBC is a university in Canada. I went to Esso in Canada, continued. Initially, the company was Exxon that owned 69% of Esso. And then Exxon merged with Mobil in the year 2000. It became ExxonMobil, and so forth. So it's a long story. So that's the history back there. Now, what I want to quickly touch upon is, what is it that I learned in IIT that held me in good stead? And what is it that I could have learned that could probably have helped me even more? Okay, so what I say down here is, let your passion define your career path and also your success criteria. Now, many of us have different success criteria. It can be anything. You just want to have fun. You want a challenge. You want the joy of invention. You want some inspiration. You want to help others. You want recognition. You want wealth. You want to leave a legacy behind. So whatever your success criteria are, let your passion define your success criteria. Like I said, my passion was invention, and I said, I'm going to keep trying this for a while. Actually, that's good because my throat is very dry. I can get some water here. Thank you. Okay, so I've combined here the experiences I had at IIT, and I've also thrown in some grad school experiences in here. The thing about IIT was the system really worked us brutally hard, and I suspect it's about the same today. The periodicals, the assignments, and there was a lot of rote memorization to be done, and I think actually that was a great asset because that really exercises the brain, and you can remember all kinds of stuff. Sometimes you remember a lot of trivial information, but when you put it all together, it works out to be good for your brain. Then I had this passion of invention kind of thing. And we did have science fairs those days. It didn't have much of a participation. But I used to put something together for a science fair. And I kind of fluked getting 2 science fair prizes, I think in 66 and 67 or some such thing. So, but it was a lot of fun. And then you folks are all probably familiar with that third point. We also learned how to copy. And learning how to copy is not really a bad thing, okay? As long as you don't cheat. Maybe there's a fine distinction between copying and cheating, okay? One of the key things is, lessons here is, do not try to reinvent the wheel, Okay, do not try to do it because just for the pleasure of it. Try to improve on a wheel that already exists. Now, there is a story here which I can tell you very quickly, and Pati will remember this too, that we used to have a subject called civil engineering drawing that everybody had to take. I'm sure it's off your curricula now. I hope it is. But civil engineering drawing meant we all had to do 14 drawings during the course of the year, and we had to put together very detailed drawings of structures, basically, you know, a rest house, a guest house, all that kind of stuff. We had to draw every brick, every 9-inch by 4-inch brick on the front wall and the elevation, and rather tiresome, sickening job, okay, but we had to do it. But we got very creative. Every hostel where we had students, we had a big glass plate, and we had lights under the glass plate. And a handful of guys would do the first drawing, and then the rest of us would take that drawing and take our own sheets of paper, plunk it on that drawing already done, because then you didn't need your tri-square, all this stuff. We would do the civil engineering drawing. And we thought we were really smart. So we got through this, 14 drawings. They were all very detailed. Unfortunately, we had a pretty smart professor who looked at the back of one of the drawings, and he said, how come there's pencil marks in the front of the drawing and there's pencil marks on the back of the drawing? Because the glass plating process lifted the pencil marks from the sheet we were copying onto the back of the other sheets, okay? So we were not as smart as we thought, but you know what they made us do is stay back for 14 days in May after the term was done. I think it's in 1964, made us do every drawing, every one singly. So that was just totally mindless work for us. But the reason I have this up here about copying is, actually copying is a very common thing that people do out in industry, but you folks already know that both Microsoft and Apple lifted the graphical user interface from Xerox. Basically, that's what they did. Xerox thought that this was not a very useful invention, and Xerox in Stanford invited Steve Jobs and Bill Gates over to take a look at this stuff, and they basically picked it up. I mean, they copied exactly what Xerox did, but certainly improved upon it. So copying is not all bad. In fact, copying is a thing that happens all the time, everywhere. So just do it smartly so that you don't get any pencil marks on the back of your drawings. Okay. And finally, of course, camaraderie with batchmates. We had a hostel environment like all of you have. It was a great place for lifelong friendships. Pati and I have been friends for 53, 52 years, some such thing, for a very long time. And we keep in touch. We have, our families have grown up together. It's absolutely great. Of course, now I have to tell you about the negatives, right? It's not all fun and games. Okay, at that time at least, mentoring was probably either in its infancy or non-existent. We had to make friends with our professors, but they were not necessarily mentors per se. It would have been very useful to have mentors. I suspect it's a lot more a proactive process nowadays. I hope it is. And always look for a mentor. A mentor will take you a long way through your careers. Also, the science fair projects, we had a tour today, and we walked around and went to the Center for CFI, Center for Innovation, and that was absolutely blew my mind. And I said, if we had something like this back then, it would have been so much fun to go there and work with other students, work with other, maybe even professors. I used to sneak into the machine shop and do stuff on the lathes and other machines when I was not supposed to be there and create some stuff for the science fairs. So it was not that much fun those days. And people really didn't think about science fairs and these kind of things as being of much value. But I'm so happy to see that today the IIT is actually supporting this kind of activity, and it is fantastic. I think all of you should spend some time in that Center for Innovation place and get your ideas born and let them fly. Also, there was not much room to what we say nowadays is think outside the box. I mean, we were always encompassed in a box, and that may be with good reason, because we had to meet all the coursework. We had, very finite amount of work to do. We had a lot of stuff to study for, so we were always confined to a box. So it was difficult for us to think outside the box, and I discovered this only after going to grad school. Because when you go to grad school, especially overseas, the first thing they do is they throw you in at the deep end. And you might or might not remember the title of my Ph.D. thesis. Basically, the professor dreamt it up. He didn't know what holography was. Lasers were brand new at that time in 1968, 69. Quantum fluid mechanics was not such a great subject for me. It was okay. So putting all that stuff together, they threw me in at the deep end. I said, okay, I'll do it. So that was my thesis topic. So we got that done. But in university, in grad school, what I discovered was we were teaching assistants. We had rote memorized a lot of good stuff. We knew how to solve every kind of differential equation, every order, no matter what, we could solve that. But we were not really good at constructing the equations, to put them together, to identify the problem and build the equation around it. We were really not taught very well those days to do that. So those are the kinds of things, my experiences from both IIT and from grad school at UBC in Vancouver in Canada. How are we doing for time? I think maybe. Okay, we'll move on. Yeah, so capitalize on the IIT brand, and I'm also making a plea that you protect it, because a lot of us have gone before you, and we all love this brand. And there has been some news where people have wrecked the brand a little bit, but your job is really to protect that brand when you move to wherever you go. Whether you go overseas, whether you're in India, you go to university, you go to industry, just protect that brand. Okay. So, okay. Okay, let me just say a few words about my employer. My employer was ExxonMobil. I'm not trying to plug the company here, but I'm just trying to give you a sense for the kind of work that we did with this company. And by extension, I want you to think about wherever you go to look at what your company does. If it's just your own startup company, think of what it does. If you work for a big corporation like this, think of what it does, and try to capitalize on the positives that you see. Okay, so this is among the world's largest publicly traded companies. In fact, it was number one until 2 years ago when Apple took over as the largest market cap. But you can see the numbers. It's got $400 billion market cap. It's number 2 on the Dow Jones Industrial Average. It has revenues of over $400 billion a year. It's got earnings, just earnings, plain earnings of $40 billion a year. So it's huge numbers, very huge numbers. It's got about 70,000 people around the world. Okay. It began operations in 1870 as Standard Oil, and you've probably heard about that. There was a guy called Rockefeller who started that. He was also known as a robber baron. I mean, at those days, and I think today people say big oil is not that clean and all that kind of stuff. But it started back with Rockefeller. But the company has earned a lot and has given a lot back to the country and for various causes. It was divested by Congress in 1920s because it became so big. Standard Oil itself became so big. So it was divested into 7 companies. Standard Oil of New Jersey became Exxon, and et cetera. So by the time we got to the year 2000, those 7 companies were, again, in the top 50 companies of the world. Chevron, ExxonMobil, Standard Oil of Ohio, which is Amoco, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. It's what we call a global integrated oil company, which means that integrated means they drill for oil, they get the oil out of the ground, they take it and refine it, to make all the products from the barrel, and then also make chemical products. And not a single molecule is wasted. Every molecule that comes out of the ground gets into some product worldwide. Largely fuel, then there's lubricants and specialties and all kinds of stuff. It's the largest refiner in the world. It's probably the 2nd largest chemicals producer, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll stop mouthing off about all this stuff. I'll move on. Okay, one more. Okay, this is an important point because it has a very high reliance on technology to accomplish its business results. Now this, I think, is quite general across the industry. A lot of the big companies, they all rely on technology to accomplish results. So what you're equipped with when you leave the IIT is a very vital resource for anyone who wants to be in business. Okay? And I'll give you some examples of things that I've done or things that Exxon has done. And it's a leader in production and refining, et cetera. I think I've already said all this stuff before, and I'll just move on. And the way to identify, for example, one product you all may have heard, if you have European cars, you probably have used Mobil 1. It's the world's leading synthetic motor oil. It's just like Apple's iPhone is kind of the world's leading telephone. So it's like that. It's one of those products. And like that, there are many tens of products that are world-leading greases, synthetic lubricants of other kinds, you name it. There's lots of them. I started with Exxon in Canada. It was called Imperial Oil at the time in 1975. Soon after I finished my, my doctorate, and I think I told you that already. And then I had the chance to move around the circuit in ExxonMobil. That's one of the nice things about working for a big company is there's a lot of stuff to do. And the whole purpose of this slide is to show you that this company is engaged in so many things that I have so much choice to do different things. And that's what you need to capitalize on when you look at your future in terms of working for some company. Just capitalize on the opportunities that your employer has to offer. Certainly, even in a lifetime, you can't cover like a fraction of what some of these companies can do. But wherever you go to work, just make sure that you can capitalize on opportunities that become available to you. Okay? Yeah. Okay, so the main part of what I want to present here today is to do with, actually I'm looking back at my career is what the title said, so that's what I'm trying to do. A typical career, people call it, typically they call it a marathon and not a sprint. But a career can be made up of a number of sprints too, if you choose to. Like you may work for a multitude of companies, so short sprints, you can make a career. But in my case, my experience was at one company for 39 years, a long time. Okay, so I've just broken it down into 3 stages, just to be able to handle the things that you want to think about in a career. You have an early stage, you have a mid stage, and you have a late stage. So this is just illustrative. You can probably slice it more, but one of the rules in life should be just keep life simple. So I've just sliced it into 3 slices, okay? So in the first slice, typically, one is what they call a journeyman. That is, you're learning the trade. You're typically delivering business results for your own work. You lead. You actually become a leader, right, as soon as you join, in spite of what you might think or otherwise. The company, the outfit that you're working for expects you to lead something. So you lead by technical excellence in your own field. Whatever you've been trained to do, you want to use that to lead. And it's a place where you're going to get mentored. And you see that I'm using that word mentor all the time. This is the place when you join a new outfit, is to find yourself a mentor. Somebody you can work with, somebody who can understand you. May not believe in everything you want to do, just like my dad wasn't really sure, he wanted me to do engineering. But that's okay, but otherwise he believed in me and supported me. So a mentor, finding a mentor is very important. Now in the next stage, I've called this stage mover and shaker. Now most people spend most of their careers in this moving and shaking phase. So what that means is you've done a great job up front, you're being recognized for what you've done, and you can do things that can change the world in a sense. You don't have total control of the company, okay? You're not a CEO or not, but you could be head of a large part of the company. You could be head of a function, etc. So you deliver through your own work, but just watch the watchword here is team. Really, none of us can contribute anything on our own, ultimately. You have to rely on people. So that's a very important thing to understand. So you deliver through your own work and you deliver through your team's work. And you may be leading small or medium-sized teams or functions or projects and so forth, okay? And finally, you reach the third phase where you deliver through people across the organization. So to a large degree, you don't even know you may not know who all the people are, but you're delivering because you're inspiring other people to do stuff for you. And you lead an entire organization or a large function, and you're now experienced, you're insightful, and you're a leader. Again, watch the word mentor, because you've been mentored up front. Get yourself ready to mentor at the back end, that there is somebody who wants to be mentored or has to be mentored. So, okay, all this sounds like theory, right? So I'll just give you some examples, maybe from my own experience. And okay, early career stage learnings. And I've been saying this over and over again. I'll tell you, it's really important. Search out a good mentor, all right? And the other thing I want to point out is what you learn in one career stage doesn't end. It's not a box like I drew it there. It's a continuum. What you learn, you keep building on it, so you're learning right through your career, right to the end, from the beginning to the end, okay? Now, the reason you want to mentor is, we use a phrase called learn the ropes. That is, people who know how the organization works. Always search out for the person who knows how the organization works. Understand the corporate culture, you know, how they operate, and see how well you fit into the corporate culture. You may have some power to modify the culture, and that's what happens in subsequent career stages. But seek out, understand the corporate culture, and keep an eye out for opportunities, because typically mentors are the ones who tell you what the opportunities are around the company. So that's something to watch out for. Okay. The second learning from early career stage, and these are all my learnings actually. I've experienced these things. I'm not telling you stuff from a textbook. It is stuff that I've experienced. Okay, generate value propositions for your outfit. Now, the value proposition can be anything. In this case, I'm talking about intellectual property, which is to do with patents, to do with things like know-how. In fact, a lot of the most valuable things that the corporations have never see the light of day as a patent. They're kept as know-how. And the reason you keep things as know-how is because once you publish a patent, people can read your patent and re-engineer a patent to a great degree. So the best kept secrets are like, for example, the recipe for Coca-Cola. It's know-how. Nobody knows what the recipe is and how it comes together. And like that, there are lots of things in industry that is kept as know-how and never sees the light of day as a patent. Okay, and always strive to reduce to practice. Now, the term reduce to practice is actually a patent term. When you file for a patent and it goes in front of the examiner wants to see some evidence that you have reduced whatever you've invented to practice. But your corporation or your company or yourself, if you own one, you're most interested in taking this idea and implementing it. So reduce to practice, just do it. You know, like Nike says, just do it. Reduce it to practice. Okay? Okay. Become an entrepreneur. I know nowadays the word entrepreneur is bandied around a lot. But I recall that in the very early days with Esso, as soon as we got started with our work, they expected us to behave like entrepreneurs. Although you're within the constraints of the company and their rules, they expect you to do your work and in your area, much like an entrepreneur. New ideas, apply them. Certainly, you have to get clearance for all these things. You have to take it past mid-management, upper management, so forth. But entrepreneurship starts with you, and it starts as soon as you're ready to apply stuff. And there are a whole bunch of things here, like understand the customer. Very often, the initial customers are what we call internal customers. They're within your own company or your own sphere of influence. It could be just your boss who's your internal customer. And you learn how to deal with that customer. And then as you progress, you also start to get external customers. So whatever work you're in, just make sure you understand the customer and develop and implement solutions to problems and new products. I mean, that's really what we all get paid for, ultimately. And then focus on the bottom line. Always focus on the bottom line. People will ask you, what's the bottom line? Like, just like I said at the start, in the corporate world, you typically get time for one biograph and 5 lines, and the last line is really the bottom line, how much money you're going to make. You might think it's greed. Ultimately, it's actually not greed. You're taking care of the shareholders' value, and the money that's made often is pedaled back into the business and often helps the economy and helps people get jobs, et cetera, et cetera. So making money is not a bad thing for corporations. If there are any questions, I'll be glad to take them at any time. So please feel free to ask me questions. Now, I'm going to just share a story. I've got a bunch of stories. I know that I'm probably chewing up time, so I'm not going to go through all my stories. But I'd love to tell you this little story because this is when I joined the company. This is usually the most exciting time is when you just get out of school. In this case, I'd finished my doctorate. I went to Esso, and they would look at me and say, "Oh, this guy's got a Ph.D. He may be a theoretical guy. Can he do anything that we can apply?" kind of thing. So I want to talk about this little story here, and I call it Global Travels with a Mini Filter. There's a link on that. If you just click on that link, it'll take you right. Okay. So here I am, just out of grad school. Of course, I had a chemical engineering education here. I'm out of grad school. And the first thing I'm told is, can you develop a way to improve the propane dewaxing process? Now, don't worry about the details of what this process is. Okay, worldwide. ExxonMobil is a leader in lubricant base stock production. I'm sorry about that. I should have muted that. Sorry. Okay. The reason they were having a problem is there was big lube expansions taking place, but the amount of money it takes to invest in lube expansions is very high. So you want to squeeze the last drop out of existing plants and push investment back into the future. So, I came out of school all, starry-eyed. I said, okay, new problem. I'll just throw me in the deep end. Let's see what we can do. So the propane dewaxing process actually uses propane, as you know, is a gas. It auto-refrigerates at room temperature, so when it boils, it cools. And as a result, we use it in the dewaxing process. So when it cools, it chills the waxy solution, and the wax drops out as a precipitate. So the wax crystals come out of solution. And the chemical engineering challenge, of course, here is to take that stuff and filter the oil solution from the wax. And you separate them. Both valuable products. The oil becomes a lubricating oil with very low pour point. The wax becomes a very useful product for a multitude of uses. So we have these 5 or 6 plants, one in, then Japan, Singapore, France, Italy, Canada, US, etc. So they're all over the world. And these plants were built at the time of, just after the war, just after the World War. So they were very old plants. And a series of new plants. In fact, we had one in Bombay that Hindustan Petroleum had. The challenge here was that all these different plants were doing different things. They were all operating in slightly different ways. Many of them didn't have a clue of what were the process variables, how do you run these plants. They just kept doing what they were doing. So what we did was we said, okay, let's do a lab plant correlation. Let's see how one plant compares with the next plant. And the only way to do this was to go into the plant and measure the performance in the plant. Now, the problem is quite tough because you have to deal with all this explosive propane in a mixture with oil and wax, and you had to get a solution from the chillers in the plant and do a filtration, okay? So we developed something called a mini filter, and we traveled with this thing. It was almost like, if you have seen Star Wars, like R2-D2, it looked like something like R2-D2. So we took this out to the field, and I had a technician with me. His name was Chuck Bailey. He's a great guy, a very practical guy. So we devised this, and we took it to all these plants around the world. And we had a great time traveling. But of course, the challenge for us was not to travel around and have fun, but it was to figure out what are these guys doing, and who's the best, and who's the worst, and let's get everybody up to snuff. So you can understand the challenges here. There are many things. We learn stuff at university, and we think it's going to work like in theory, but it doesn't. It doesn't work like we were taught it's going to work. Had to apply some principles of chemical engineering, fortunately, like wax crystallization kinetics and nucleate pool boiling and separation, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. So those of you who are not chemical engineers, don't worry. It's just to tell you that some of the stuff you learn will actually come in very useful, okay? You might not know it, that it'll come in useful, but it'll come in useful. And what we discovered was it wasn't so much about the process per se, but it also had to do with the way the process was conducted, the culture. The Japanese had a way of doing it. They were very precise. They were very careful. The Singaporeans had a way of doing it. All of their technicians at the control panel had bachelor's degrees in engineering, unlike most other plants where people come out of high school and become technicians. And in the US, there were a bunch of plants. Actually, they were very sloppy. You go into the control house, they're sitting with their feet on the console. It's very little respect for what's going on. You go to Japan, the control house is like a shrine. It's like a temple. You don't go there unless you have business, and you take your shoes off to go in there. So they were worlds apart. And then in France, it was like a Benedictine monastery. They would record. On those days, we didn't have all these fancy computers and stuff. There's a lot of pneumatic instrumentation. They would write stuff on large pieces of paper and so forth. Anyway, long story short, all kinds of different cultures, all kinds of different ways of doing things. And here's an Indian guy with another Canadian guy coming around, trying to assess this and trying to then tell them what's good or what's not good. So you can understand the kind of reaction. Those days, we hadn't had the track record we have now. So they would look at me like someone from a third world country, and okay, let's see what this guy has to tell us that we don't already know, kind of thing. So we had to coalesce the learnings, put all this stuff together. In the end, we actually created a new program that was called a STAP program, the Specialized Technical Assistance Program. So we were able to leave behind a lot of learnings. We brought a lot of the plants up to snuff. We showed them, we showed the Americans what the Japanese were doing. We showed the French what the Singaporeans were doing. We did all these kinds of improvements, and we were able to leave a kind of legacy behind. And at that time, this was like 35 years ago, whatever, the bottom line impact was $10 to $20 million a year return, which by today's standards is a lot of money. So they deferred all that investment. They were able to just get existing plants to work the way they should be working. So that's why I love telling the story, because what it did for me was it helped my boss understand that, okay, you give him a problem, he's going to try and find a solution to it, and he'll find a solution, make a practical, get a practical solution, and then we'll make some money with this thing. So it worked, fortunately for me. So the story here is, if you hit the return button, please. Yeah. Okay, there was in the previous slide, there's the bottom line, which said, get your career off to a good start. So if I were to translate that, I'd say, get your own mini filter example. Take on something that they tell you to take on. Don't be afraid, just take it on. Figure out a way to do it. And once you've done that, and if you're off to a good start, you basically, well begun is half done. I think there's a very good saying there. So you should, that's a great start. All right, we'll move on, and I'll just do a time check. It's already 6 o'clock. Okay, we're going to move a little faster. I'll stop telling stories, okay? Let's get out of early stage. Let's get to mid stage, career learnings. We'll do this fast. Okay, you've got to lead people now. You've got to lead people. As soon as they know that you can do something, they'll give you more people, and they'll give you more resources, which is not easy to get in industry. But once they start giving you, you have to supervise people, and you have to work with them, empathize, encourage. You know, you got to walk the talk. You can't just sit in an ivory tower and lecture to people. So you've got to do that. You've got to inspire. And one of the toughest parts in leading people is the performance assessment part, which you haven't experienced yet in school. To a degree you do, because you get a test mark, but that is very objective. But performance assessment starts to become subjective, because you may have 10 Einsteins working for you. You still have to rank them 1 to 10. And in industry, typically, Einstein number 10 will be told, you got to, you know, spruce up, or you'll have to leave, kind of thing. So that's a tough job, and that's something you get to learn with a little bit of practice. Okay, promote teamwork, and the one-liner here is always use the word we and never say I did this, I did that, I did so-and-so. Because, like I said, after a certain stage, there's nothing you can do just by I. You've got to have lots of people helping you, and you're going to do it through people. Okay, we did this, we did that, we will do it together. And you, as a leader, will actually be the last person. Like the captain of a ship, you should be the last one to leave the ship if something goes wrong. Okay? Where are the ups and downs? We'll have lots of challenges. We've had challenges further down. I'm not going to get into the story, but we designed some processes to make new types of base stocks, what we call group 3 base stocks for things like Mobil 1 and superior motor oil. It is all based on catalysis and catalyst chemistry and hydroisomerization and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, we were the R&D guys, but we worked closely with engineering, who worked closely with operations, et cetera, et cetera. And at one location, we actually had a reactor blow up and spew the catalyst all over the place. Fortunately, nobody died. But that was really rough. It was very rough for the team. You had to kind of go back to square one, re-examine the exotherms of this catalyst bed. Engineering went back to redesign, put new process procedures in place, et cetera. So you will have lots of ups and downs. You'll have lots of downs. So just weather those. That's a very important part of mid-career learnings. Communicate. Always communicate. Just always talk to people. And I put up and down because you have to communicate. There'll always be somebody senior to you. Even when you become the CEO, there'll be the board. You'll have to report to them. And when you're at the bottom, you have to report to a zillion people. So always communicate crisply up, and when you're in charge of people, always communicate crisply down. And there's a thing called the KISS principle. It's called keep it simple, and the last word starts with an S. If anyone can guess what it is, it's silly? Yeah, close. Stupid, actually. Keep it simple, stupid. So we are always told that. Keep your communication really simple that people can understand. Don't complicate it with jargon, with long words, with theory, with all that kind of stuff. Even though you might understand all that, translate it and keep it simple. Okay? Okay, we'll move on. And leave a legacy, okay? You want to leave a legacy. You want to leave something behind. Fortunately, that mini filter example that I told you about, we started to leave a legacy on the STAP part, the specialized technical assistance. Okay, so you'll be innovating all the time, demonstrate and deliver to the marketplace. That's where the story really ends. You have to deliver something to the marketplace. You may be a great inventor. And that's the reason I showed you that first slide where Edison was not just an inventor, he was also a businessman. He took his inventions and made sure that you could apply it and you could actually improve human existence by applying it. Okay? That's very grandiose, but many of us cannot do that. In fact, I may have skipped a thing. When we were talking about Edison way up front, I used to tell my dad, there's nothing left to invent anymore. Like, it looks like Edison has invented everything. And that's not the case. There's a lot of things to invent. But invention is not the be-all and end-all. After that, you have to take it to the marketplace and apply it. Okay? And then be loyal to and protect the brand. And the brand, of course, is like the company you work for, be loyal. The product brands, you've heard of all the product brands, like Mobil 1 in my case, is Apple products, is Windows, whatever brand. And then your own brand. And I think I told you early on, you have your brand, you have the IIT brand. Make sure you protect that brand. And I'll tell you in a minute why. Okay, I'm going to skip the story. Okay, the story is in the back. The stories go on and on. So I'll stop telling stories. And let's just move on to career stage number 3. I think it's the next line. Okay, so once you've done all this stuff and gotten past your mid-career stage, you get to a place where you have a lot of clout, but you really don't get to do much yourself, but you have to use people to get stuff done. And one of the places is to simplify the organization, and every organization can be simplified, continuously simplified. So there are systems, there are processes, and especially nowadays with computing systems and all that, everything can be improved and done better. Okay? So the challenge here is to prioritize, pick the best horse, and you have to use a lot of intuition for that. Pick the best horse and resource it properly and get it done. You will fail on a few things, but you should be able to win most of the battles. Okay, mentor people. I think I've been saying this from the beginning. Always pick some people to mentor, because mentoring is a way of starting to give back what you have taken from someone else. You want to give back to somebody else who's looking for a mentor, okay? All these phrases here, envision the future, how you want the future to look for your company. One example I had here was, for a time I used to manage a large product line. We had, at the time of the merger, ExxonMobil, we had like 22,000 products. Wasn't the right way to do business. Way too many products, way too much managing systems, way too many packagings, way too many ways of doing things. We worked on that and reduced from 22,000 products to finally we had about 2,000 products. So we cut it by 90%. And after cutting it by 90%, our actually profitability improved by about 30%. And because you cut out a lot of waste, but you have to take a tough stance. So envisioning the future takes a little bit of work, okay? So okay, manage change, yeah. But they say change is the only constant. You know, it's constant change. After we graduated from the IIT, we thought we had everything we needed to know, the tools that we had in hand, we thought will be good for a lifetime. Forget it. Things kept changing. We didn't have computers. We had some, I still have my slide rule from IIT. Boy, that's a masterpiece. But, all went by the wayside. Computers, and every day these things are changing. So change is a constant. So rejuvenate, retool, relearn all the time. Just be prepared to do that because it's going to happen all the time. And I won't talk about the stories that I have. There was a new system that we implemented for managing our product system. So you can imagine we went from 20-some thousand products to 2,000 products. And we needed a spec system where we could put all of the recipes and specifications for all of these products in one place. We had a system, but it had gotten outdated even since 2000. So we had to go back. It was a multi-million-dollar 5-year project, and that is just coming to an end. So I was involved in that as the global change executive. So my job was to tell people the changes that were coming in their lives as a result of the new system. And everybody hates change. Guaranteed you hate change. You're so used to doing the stuff you're doing with your keyboard and stuff, and if you change the keyboard, change some things, you hate it. So we had to communicate, we had to show people, we had to train them, we had to do a lot of things that are not so much fun from a technical standpoint, but all that is necessary to do in order to implement the change. And then influence the outside world, the world outside your organization. So as you get to kind of career stage 3, you get asked to sit on one committee or another committee. It could be a government committee, it could be a university committee, it could be all of those things. Take an active role in that, and one of the things I would say is start that process early on in the career, because some of us wait till we get pretty late in the career and then suddenly wake up and say, oh, I should have been doing this. Join the institute for the American Institute of Chemical Engineers or Indian Institute of Electrical Engineers or whatever it is. Go there and make your pitch and whatever you can do. Influence the outside world to the extent you can, because it will pay off in dividends. Okay, I'm going to move on. Okay, this is the last line, but it's one of the most important lines. Conduct business with the utmost integrity. And I'll tell you a couple of short stories here, because integrity is what protects the brand. And integrity comes in somewhat slightly different ways. And we learned some of these things the very hard way. Okay? Okay, leave a legacy for the organization, but make sure you do this with integrity. So I'm going to the next slide. And we, at least for myself and for ExxonMobil, we learned some of these things the hard way. One thing is operations integrity. Everybody has heard about the Exxon Valdez incident that took place in the late 90s. The captain of the ship was drinking in his cabin while the ship was leaving harbor in Prince William Sound in Alaska, very sensitive, environmentally dangerous area. And his second mate was on deck, and he ran the ship aground and spilled millions of gallons of crude oil. And the company got a really bad name. At the same time, the CEO kind of poo-pooed the thing a little bit at the press conference, so it didn't help. Got off to a really bad start. After that, the company has instituted the Operations Integrity Program, which is to do with safety, health, and environment. Nothing can be done. Nothing. Doesn't matter what the bottom line says, how many millions or billions of dollars it's worth. If you cannot do it safely, if you cannot do it without injuring health, and if you cannot do it without protecting the environment and following the laws of wherever you operate. Very tough. For example, one of the things is you cannot drive your car with a company phone, a cell phone, and be talking on it. You'll be basically terminated right away. No questions asked. It's that tough, the safety, health, and environment part of the company. This is kind of a lecture series on its own right, but that's how intensely you got to watch your safety and the way you operate. The other thing is product integrity. Like, we sell all these products, we sell it to customers, and there's a lot of regulations around products. It's called regulatory compliance. The government requires you to meet certain standards, and there are other standards that you may have the science for that you understand, but you actually want to protect the customer even more. So you want to implement all of those things. It costs you money. But the value of that is that you do not endanger the customer in any fashion, and you provide the performance as you promise. If you say, I promise that my lubricant will be good for your car for 16,000 kilometers and that the engine won't fall apart, it better be good. And you better have the test data to prove it. You better have all of the information you need to stand behind it. So product integrity, very important, and especially from a toxicity and labeling standpoint. There are many products that can be toxic to the environment, toxic to humans, etc. All that needs to be understood and put in place. So product development is actually a pretty complex process. It's not just inventing a new product and saying, oh, I'm off to the races. There's a lot of work to be done before you put it out in the marketplace. There's another thing called data integrity, and this is very important for us as engineers and scientists. Make sure that your data has its integrity, is not falsified in any fashion. There have been many incidents where product quality inspections in manufacturing plants, for example, have been falsified because the technician didn't want to take the time to do some additional measurements or do the routine measurements, in fact, not even additional. So they just copy it from the previous batch and send it out. Absolute no-no. That's a terrible thing to do. And again, claims data, there's been many examples in the industry where people have run into trouble with this. So it's very important. And finally, controls integrity. This is personal integrity in the business. And ethical conduct in the business. Actually, they were not teaching this very well in management schools until actually quite recently. Ethical conduct and observing antitrust laws and export control laws, very important. I mean, one of the reasons Standard Oil was divested in 1925 was Congress thought it was a monopoly, and it contravened antitrust laws. So it is broken up into 7 companies. It also applies to workplace behavior, workplace harassment, all of those kinds of things. So why am I focusing so much on integrity? The reason for that is we don't do anything unless it meets all the tests for integrity. And it's really good to know this right at the start. And everybody is taught all of this stuff. We go through courses, we learn about integrity. But the top of the house in the company is ultimately responsible for this. So if there's one question a CEO generally asks is testing for integrity more than anything else. Okay? I think I'm getting to the end. I'm going to keep moving. So if you cannot conduct business with integrity, don't do it at all. Well, I can say that to you, but when you join your company, they may say, can you do this or can you do that? I think you should be able to test and make sure that you feel that what you're doing is with proper integrity. And most companies have a lot of, manuals and paperwork on this kind of thing. And it's very big now. The controls integrity piece, all of you would have heard about the Securities and Exchange Commission's work on insider trading. Two people went many more than two went to jail, but the guy who went to jail, the top guy was a guy called Rajaratnam. He was a Sri Lankan. He went to jail for 13 years. And the second guy was Rajat Gupta, who was actually one of our own IIT Delhi person, who was the head of McKinsey. He was on one of the companies. He was a director of one of the companies. And from a board meeting, he let this guy know what the insider information was. It's known as one of the biggest, it is the biggest case in insider trading in American history. So there's a CNN show called American Greed on which you can see this. So, as an IIT person, sometimes you lower your head in shame and say, oh boy, one of our own did it. So it's very important to know right up front that this is something you should really watch out for. Integrity is really key to the business. In fact, integrity is really key to conducting your own life. So, let's go. We're coming to an end. Okay, all the stuff I've been talking about, I'm just trying to show this as a block diagram, like you're building a wall. You've got your technical expertise. That's what you get in IIT. You're going to take that with you. It's yours. You've worked hard for it. And integrity is at the top of the house. You've got to behave with integrity. Now, all of the other stuff I showed you kind of comes in between here. If you see things like leadership, teamwork, communications, value generation, entrepreneurship, all kind of stage one stuff where you've started to look at these things in your career. You pull all that stuff together. That's really stage one, but you keep building it as you progress in your career. And then you get more responsibility. Then you have to look at things like, how do you manage change? How do you rejuvenate the organization? How do you provide mentorship? And then polish up on people skills, because that'll be more and more necessary as you go forward. You need it right at the start, but you need it a lot more as you start getting into your career stages. And finally, there are some things up there: visioning, influencing, strategizing. Usually the very senior people in the company do that kind of stuff. But certainly even at the working level, you want to be thinking in those terms. Okay? So you can see all the building blocks here, and this is your recipe to climb the ladder. Okay? Just get right to the top. And as a CEO, you'll have to fuss about integrity most of all. Okay, this is kind of getting close to a closing slide, giving back. And my opening line is, giving back does not have to wait till the end of one's career. Like, I feel somewhat embarrassed sometimes when I think about, oh boy, I could have given back a lot more. I could have given back more to the IIT, etc. About 5 years ago, I started the process here, but I had to discontinue because of certain personal reasons. But coming back to this, I used to be a science fair mentor when I was in Canada. I used to work with the STEM group in Virginia. We volunteer in various charities. There's also a thing called Save the Tiger Fund, and because the tiger is ExxonMobil's mascot. And interestingly, that ExxonMobil is one of the biggest contributors, and it's been a very successful program. In fact, I have a newspaper clipping in the back here. I won't get there. But the tiger population this was in Karnataka, and the newspaper I saw just a week ago, has gone from like just a handful to like in the hundreds. So it's been a very successful program to save the tiger. Not because of ExxonMobil, but partly, you give back. And we used to volunteer time and effort to do this kind of thing. And finally, of course, with IIT itself. And Professor Nagarajan and I were just kind of batting around on with a few ideas, but there's so much we can do to give back to where we came from, and there's so much we derived from the IIT. So that's. I think I'm pretty much done. I think I must have gone way over time. 6:30. Okay. Let me see the next slide. Everybody know him, I guess. Yeah? Yeah, absolutely. Swami Vivekananda, okay. We have to come back to our roots, finally. And he had some wise words, okay. He was a man of very high intuition. And he has a little poem that I've been following as a guide to both career and life. So it talks about the mother's heart, the hero's will, the sweetness of the southern breeze, and all those things. And it comes to the line where it says, "To you, O India's future son." Actually, I think it applies to the whole world. It applies to everybody in the world to be like what he describes. And I love the last line. He says, "You be the mistress, servant, friend in one." And no matter what station in life you're in, whether you've just joined the corporation, you're the journeyman, you should be prepared to do everything yourself. You should be prepared to be, the mistress or master of your business. You should be prepared to roll up your sleeves and do it. And finally, you're your own friend, because finally you talk to yourself and say, this is where I need to get it done. So, and as you progress and you get to the top of the house, you still should have the same mentality. Like, you're the mistress, you're still the servant and friend in one. So, great word from Swami Vivekananda. So I'll stop right here. So I showed you two pictures of two people, Edison and Vivekananda. So they're kind of the bookends of a career. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there and invite some questions. I hope I haven't bored you all the personal stories, but there are lots of personal stories. And what did Professor Anand say? Tell the truth as long as it doesn't come in the way or some such thing, right? Yeah. I certainly invite questions, but feel free to ask questions. It's not very often nowadays that one person will spend 39 years with one company and leave, okay? So the new reality is that many companies don't give you all the kinds of benefits that the so-called older companies would give. And they've changed all that. So you may have incentive to work for a few years for one company, move on to another. Multiple sprints, but all of the ingredients are the same. That's what I think. The ingredients are absolutely the same. There's no question. I left you so baffled, is it? Any question? There's no question that's stupid. Yeah. Yeah, I had mixed feelings about that. Personally, I actually enjoyed it. It could have been reduced. In fact, when we went to the workshops, we were talking about it. We used to do that cube and thing, we used to chip, like for a whole year, we used to chip through that big block of steel and then make that cube. It taught us something in the end. It taught us some discipline, but we had to really work hard for it. And you may question that and say, was it really valuable in the big scheme of things? That's a debate to be had. But there were parts of the workshop that were very useful to me because like I said, I did some science fair projects. So I used to sneak back into the workshop and I used to work on the lathe and the milling machine and things like that. Very useful, very hands-on. So it's debatable. I think nowadays there's so many more things to learn maybe that one might argue, this is not of much value if I'm an IT person or something like that. But
IIT Madras.
Oh, Save the Deer project.
Because
They strayed off the campus. They were killed inside the campus or they were strayed off the campus, inside? By accidents, is it? By
natural death around 15 to 20, others died due to stray dogs.
No, because the thing I'd heard was that actually there's maybe a overpopulation of deer, but you know, the thing is, the land here can probably sustain a certain number of deer, because if you just keep them all locked in and multiplying infinitely, you're ultimately going to have a different kind of problem. They'll probably die of disease or I don't know what. So, you know, this is a certainly valuable thing to check, but someone with the expertise in the area is probably better equipped than me to comment on that. Certainly, I would support that, but I don't think I can contribute to saving the deer as such, on your campus, that is. Because I live in Northern Virginia in the US. We have a deer population like you won't believe it. We've got literally deer coming out of our ears, like, because you can't shoot them, you can't do anything. So they institute a program every fall, is it? Every fall they institute a program, and it may sound not a very nice thing to do, but they actually cull the deer population very carefully. They bring some naturalists in, biologists in, they all do a proper count of the deer, they look at the population distribution, and they actually cull the deer in order to manage it, because the deer are just slaughtered on the roads. They get trapped on the interstates, and it's a very sad sight. And of course, if you have a good garden, you'll really hate the deer, because they're right in there eating all the stuff that you've been trying to grow. But that's probably the kind of program somebody has to institute in order to save the deer. You have to save them from themselves, in a sense, rather than from people. Sorry, my 2 cents.
Thank you, sir, for the most insightful lecture. I now request Dean IAR, Professor Nagarajan, to present Dr. Achia with a memento.
Boy, that's beautiful. Beautiful. Would have not been possible without her intervention. Thank you, Professor Nagarajan. Thank you. It's a great talk. And thanks, Suresh. And
thank you, everyone,
thank
for
you all
attending.
for coming. It's really a pleasure. I hope what I said was useful. You know, it's reflections on what I experienced, but I think you all will one day say, oh, that gray-haired guy came and told us some stuff about integrity. Maybe there's something to it. Okay? So all the best.